Welcome back. In this video, let's look at a variety of puzzles related to methods. One of the things which we did earlier was we created a method called printString where we had default values for the parameters. So we said the default value for str is hello world, the default value for number of times is 5. This is cool because this allows us just to call printString and it would print hello world 5 times. But let's say I would want to print hello world, but I would want to print it 6 times. How do I call it? Pause the video in here and try and think about it. I would want to print hello world, but I would want to print it 6 times. Will it work if I say print string 6? What is happening? What is happening is 6 is being passed as the first parameter. So 6 is matching against str and it's using 6 and it's printing default number of times, which is 5. What we want to do is we would want to use the default string hello world and print it 6 times. How do I do that? One of the ways you can do that in Python is by using something called named parameters. You can say number of times is equal to 6. This is a named parameter. In languages like Java, there is no provision of doing something like this. So print string number of times is equal to 6. Hello world is printed 6 times. What we are doing in here is instead of depending on position, what we are saying is the name of the parameter. We said print string number of times is equal to 6. So instead of using the default for number of times, we would be using 6. For str, we would continue using the default. Named parameters is very useful when a method has a number of parameters and you would want to make it very clear which parameter you're passing the value for. It makes it sense to use named parameters. Now, let's call print string with 7, 8. What happens? You'd see that 7 is printed 8 times. So over here, what is happening is str gets a value of 7 and print 7. Print is defined for a string, so it does not have a problem. So instead of the str, I can send a string, I can send a number, even I can send a float. So I'm able to print 7.5 8 times because inside the method I'm just doing a print and print works with any type. Let's look at number of times. What would happen if I say 7.5 and pass in 8? I'm just kidding. Some string. So here the method accepts number of times as a parameter. But one of the most important things you need to note is how number of times is used. We are using it in the range method. In the range method, you can only pass in numbers, integers. You cannot pass in a string. So let's see what would happen if I say 7.5, 8. It says error. It says type error must be a string, not int. So you can see it's saying line 2 in print string. It's saying there is a type error in here. This cannot work in this specific way. This would work, but you cannot pass a string and expect it to be used as a number. The simple rule of thumb in Python is Python by itself does not check for any type safety. So if you have a parameter, by default you can pass any type to it. So you can pass an integer, a floating point value, a string, a boolean value. We'll talk about boolean values a little later, true or false kinds of values. So you can pass any kinds of values as parameters, but Python will throw an error if the function which is using it expects it only of a specific type. So the range function here, it expects that the number of times is a number. It expects that it is an integer value. So in those kind of situations, you'd get errors. But by default, Python does not prevent you from being able to call the function with a different type. The last thing which we would be looking at in this specific video is the method names. Until now, you would see the different names that we have given to our methods: print underscore string, print multiplication table, print underscore multiplication underscore table, print string. This is exactly the format in which Python developers name their methods. This is kind of the convention, using underscore to separate the words. However, there are a few rules associated with what you can name a method as and what you cannot name a method as. One of the important ones are the basic rules related to variables, right? When we talked about variables, we said a variable name cannot start with 1. So I cannot say 1 underscore print as the name of the method. This would give us an error. However, you can start it with an alphabet or you can start it with an underscore. But if you start it with a numeric value, it would give an error. But the second character can be a numeric value. You can see that it's accepting a definition. So if I say print something, it would accept it as a proper method definition. So as far as this is concerned, naming methods is very similar to naming variables. The other important thing regarding naming methods and variables is you cannot have a keyword as a variable name. Now, what is a keyword? When we talked about for loop, we looked at this, right? So for I in range of 1, 11, we said, oops, colon, print I. So this is the code which we wrote earlier. This for here is a keyword. The in here is a keyword. So for in, when we define a method, how do we define it? We say def, def, and we give name of the method, right? This def here is a keyword. Later, we would look at a few other keywords like while, return, if, else, else if. You cannot have methods and variables with the same name as a keyword. So you cannot have a def, a method with the name as def as well. So it would say error. You cannot have a method with the name as in, error. You cannot have a method with a name as for, because these are all keywords in Python. So you cannot have a method or a variable with the name as a keyword. There you go. That's a lot of stuff that we did in this specific video. We started with talking about default arguments and we talked about named parameters before moving into the fact that in Python there is no real type checking. So once you define a parameter, you can pass any type to it, but the execution might throw an error if the method expects the argument to be a specific type. The last thing which we looked at are the typical naming conventions with method names. We prefer using underscores to separate the words as the name of the methods, and we cannot use keywords as variable or method names. We looked at a few keywords like def, which is used to define a method. We talked about for, in, and other stuff as well. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, bye bye.